Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Alexandra DeSanctis of National Review in for Jim Garrity today. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. The good and the bad martini all kind of jumbled up together into one big emerging story out of the state of Florida, Alexandra, where we thought on Tuesday night, by very competitive, narrow margins, that Ron DeSantis had defeated Andrew Gillum in the governor's race, and that Rick Scott, the sitting governor, had defeated longtime Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. Both of those races, I believe, had been called, and then slowly over time, this margin got closer and closer, particularly in the Senate race, oddly enough, due to ballots continuing to come in from especially Broward County, but also Palm Beach County, both of which are Democratic strongholds. Marco Rubio, the other senator from Florida, with a Twitter thread yesterday that really kind of called attention to this. He says, long but important thread on elections in Florida. Bay County was hit by a Category 4 hurricane just 4 weeks ago, yet managed to count votes and submit timely results. Yet over 41 hours after polls closed, and that was yesterday, so it's in the 60s now, Broward Elections Office is still counting votes. The Broward supervisor says she doesn't know how many votes are left to be counted and isn't reporting hourly or regularly, but rather releasing thousands of additional votes, often in the overnight hours, that are chipping away at GOP leads. Broward Elections Department has a history of violating the law. A court found they improperly handled votes by mail. A court found they destroyed ballots in 2016 in violation of state and federal law. Now Democrat lawyers are descending on Florida, and they have been very clear that they aren't here to make sure that every vote is counted. They are here to change the results of the election, and Broward is where they plan to do it. He says a U.S. Senate seat and a statewide cabinet officer, I believe it's Secretary of Agriculture, are now potentially in the hands of an election supervisor with a history of incompetence and of blatant violations of state and federal laws. And then the coup de grace, Broward election supervisor's ongoing violation of Florida law requiring timely reporting isn't just annoying incompetence. It has opened the door for lawyers to come here and try to steal a seat in the U.S. Senate and the Florida cabinet. Here's the law that he's referring to. The canvassing board shall report all early voting and all tabulated vote-by-mail results to the Department of State within 30 minutes after the polls close. So that would be 7:30, whether it's Eastern or Central time. The state covers 2 time zones. Thereafter, the canvassing board shall report, with the exception of provisional ballots, updated precinct election results to the department at least every 45 minutes until all results are completely reported. The supervisor of elections shall notify the department immediately of any circumstances that do not permit periodic updates as required. So that's the backdrop initially. Then Rick Scott, the sitting governor again, and the presumed winner of the Senate race, with a short statement last night talking about a number of things and echoing a lot of what Rubio said. First of all, about the laws.
Both Broward and Palm Beach counties have failed in their duty to follow Florida law, which requires that vote by mail and absentee ballots are counted within 30 minutes of polls closing. Further, Palm Beach County has failed to update the Department of State since 10:19 a.m. yesterday. This is in complete violation of Florida law, which requires updated reports every 45 minutes until results are completely reported. The people of Florida deserve fairness and transparency, and the supervisors are failing to give it to us. Every Floridian should be concerned there may be rampant fraud happening in Palm Beach and Broward counties. And the Broward Supervisor of Elections, Brenda Snipes, has a history of acting in absolute bad faith. Every day since the election, the left-wing activists in Broward County have been coming up with more and more ballots out of nowhere. We all know what is going on. Every person in Florida knows exactly what is happening. Their goal is to keep mysteriously finding more votes until the election turns out the way they want. And when that fails, they will file a bunch of lawsuits in order to try to overturn the will of the voters.
And then he went on to mention that Bill Nelson's attorney is Mark Elias, famously of Perkins Coie, which is involved in the whole dossier thing, but that's irrelevant here. And he came down and said that he's here to win an election, not necessarily to make sure that the vote is counted fairly. So Rick Scott also pointing out that as of Tuesday night, election night, Broward County said 634,000 votes had been cast in that county. Now, just in the past 48 to, I guess, 72 hours, nearly now, it's up to 712,000, almost 713,000, plus another 15,000 found in Palm Beach County. So, Alexandra, what do you make of it all?
Well, I mean, I think this puts Rick Scott in a pretty tough position because on the one hand, he's the guy, the called winner of this election. He's beaten Bill Nelson by, all the facts that we have on the table here. But at the same time, he's also the governor of Florida, which means he now has to state what the Florida law is, say that these counties are not following the law. And it looks like he's just advocating for himself to be declared the winner. So it sort of is a weird position for him to be in. But I have every confidence, or at least would like to believe that, even if the vote had gone the other way and say a different county that was more right-leaning was suddenly finding ballot boxes trickling in over the course of 3 days, Rick Scott would be doing the exact same thing, even if, Bill Nelson was in the lead by 17,000 or whatever it is votes. So the point here is look at the law. These people aren't following the law, and maybe they're not. Maybe they truly are, finding ballot boxes in the back room, and they aren't, making up ballots that are going to tilt the election towards Nelson just to give them the most fair reading. But even so, this isn't, there are relevant laws in place to ensure that these places follow, they don't have the opportunity to tilt elections in that way. So I think clearly anybody who cares about Floridians getting their wish, whether they're on the right or the left, should be concerned about this type of possible tampering. What
do you make of the immediate PR game that happens here? Because, Andrew Gillum is sounding exactly like Al Gore 18 years ago when Al Gore was out there saying, this is America. In America, we count the votes. And, of course, he only wanted recounts in 4 heavily Democratic-leaning counties at that time, which damaged his credibility. And that's where Gillum is now, and that's where Bill Nelson is now. And of course, the Republicans are standing up for the rule of law and saying, hey, this was a 57,000 vote lead on election night when this race was called. Now it's down to about 15,000, a shift of 42,000 votes. Which is a pretty remarkable percentage even in Democratic-leading counties when you make the contention that about 80,000 new votes have been found. A shift of 42,000 out of 80,000 is a much higher percentage, I think, than Bill Nelson had originally won Broward County by.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is why we have the laws in place, not because, we know for sure that people in Broward County are committing voter fraud, but because we don't want to have even the suspicion of possible fraud hanging over the process. That's why we have these reporting guidelines, why Florida requires, you can only count ballots that were reported by a certain hour. And so you can't just keep letting these trickle in. That's why the system exists the way that it does. And I think, this is classic Democratic. My dad was talking to me yesterday about a time when it went to the Senate, the Senate can decide, has rules about determining who's the winner of the election. And at one time, a Senate contest in New Hampshire actually went to the Senate, and they had to decide which the people to seat because there were ballots just trickling in constantly over the course, several days after the election. So I'd really not like to see that happen. But with some contingents of the left these days, I wouldn't be too surprised if they're trying to push it all the way to the end like that.
Yeah, Brenda Snipes, in addition to destroying ballots illegally from the 2016 primary involving the primary for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Apparently, at one point, at least according to Rick Scott's statement last night, she forgot to put state amendments on the ballot in Broward County. So we're not talking about somebody who's entirely competent here. The question now is, as Scott said last night, clearly she's incompetent. The question now is whether there's nefarious activity here as well. And so let the lawsuits begin. Alexandra, I don't know if you get the shivers because you're a little bit younger in the year 2000 than I was, but I'm guessing the folks around the halls in National Review are having some flashbacks right now.
I have very vague memories of 2000, but I don't really want to live through a second run of it.
No, not at all. At least this time the presidency of the United States is not on the line, but also this time the original margin from election night is a lot different too. We're not talking about 537. We're talking about 57,000. So this is going to get real ugly real fast if this doesn't get settled pretty quickly. And the president's making accusations that there's chicanery going on in the Arizona Senate race, too, which is also a frustratingly slow ballot count where Kirsten Sinema has suddenly jumped to a narrow lead. But it could be days or weeks before we actually know what's going on there. So I guess the midterm election campaign season goes on a little bit longer, which might forestall some exploratory committee announcements for 2020. Is that the silver lining we're supposed to take here?
I don't know. I was really looking forward to everything being over. I closed all my elections tabs and documents on Wednesday morning, so I'd really love it if we could be done.
And we still got some House races out there that haven't been called. But the Democrats will be in charge of the House, to be sure. And while we're still sorting out the results of the midterms, our final martini today is going to already look ahead, yes, at 2020. Alexandra, let's move on to our crazy martini now, because Florida was the bad in terms of not following the law and possible fraud there, and the good, Rubio and Scott calling them out for it. But let's get to the crazy, because one thing that we love to see is squirming politicians who would love to run for president, but they have this annoying thing of getting reelected to their current job first. Elizabeth Warren had to do that this year, and Kirsten Gillibrand had to do that this year, both of whom are rumored to be interested in running for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. Gillibrand among them, and she's already reneging on her promise to fill out her full Senate term. So this is hot air from Jazz Shaw with a little help from the New York Times, as well as a debate from late in the cycle as Gillibrand was running for re-election in New York. It will come as no surprise, says Jazz, to regular observers of New York politics that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand handily won another term on Tuesday with roughly 2/3 of the vote. Having put that simple chore behind her, Gillibrand wasted no time getting booked for Stephen Colbert's show. The host asked her the obvious question concerning her plans for 2020 and received an equally predictable answer. She's giving it a, quote, long, hard thought of consideration. The New York Times reports it this way. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on Thursday gave her strongest possible indication yet that she was contemplating a run for president in 2020, telling the late-night show host that she would give it a long, hard thought of consideration. The Times also says she won re-election to her second full term on Tuesday, but had for months brushed aside questions about her 2020 ambitions, saying she was fully focused on 2018. Back to Jazz Shaw. If all you read of the New York Times article was the title and the first few paragraphs, you'd likely assume this was nothing out of the ordinary. Notice how the Times characterizes her past comments on the subject by saying she had for months brushed aside questions about her 2020 ambitions by saying she was focused fully on 2018. Of course, anyone who has been following this story knows that's a complete lie. But the Times does, to their credit, mention her promise made during a debate, though you have to dig down quite a few paragraphs to find it. If you've been keeping up with the story, you already know Senator Gillibrand was asked about her 2020 plans and whether or not she would serve out her full 6-year term if reelected. In fact, she was asked twice. She looked straight into the camera and gave her answer. Debate moderator, can you tell New Yorkers who plan to vote for you on November 6th that you will, if reelected, serve out your 6-year Senate term? Gillibrand, I will. Moderator, just want to make this clear. You're saying that you will not get out of the race and you will not run for president. You will serve your 6 years. Gillibrand, I will serve my 6-year term. Now, obviously, Alexandra, a lot of politicians say things like this, and nobody really gets all that shocked or bent out of shape when they end up running for president anyway. But as a New Yorker and as someone who was promised by their senator that they would serve out their full 6-year term, what do you make of the immediate flip-flop here?
Well, for one thing, I really try not to consider myself represented by Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer. I'm from Virginia. Not that it's much better there, but at least there's hope of a brighter future in some ways in my home state. But to the extent that for now they are temporarily my senators, I am very distressed by it, and not by the fact that Gillibrand might run for president, but just by the fact that this is another example of her just being a really canny political operative, and she's not an honest person. When she was in the House, she had a pretty good record on guns because she was representing a more conservative area in upstate New York. And then suddenly she turned around and earned herself an F rating from the NRA as soon as she was trying to run for the Senate. And we've had pieces about stuff like this over the years about her at NRO. They're all fantastic because she's been talking on both sides of her mouth on nearly every issue for a long time. And I'd love to see her run for president just so some of that could possibly be unearthed by her primary opponents. And another huge example of this is she's super loyal to Bill Clinton and to Hillary Clinton, but at the same time tries to be a huge proponent of the Me Too movement and of, justice for women who've been sexually harassed or assaulted. And when she was confronted about this on The View earlier this year by Meghan McCain, she had no answer. She couldn't explain why she continues to appear at events and defend Bill and Hillary, despite obviously the former president's own misconduct. So I think she's a huge hypocrite, and this is just another example.
Do you think she's going to get much traction, assuming she actually does get in the race? I mean, this is going to be a pretty crowded Democratic field, and strident liberals from the Northeast are not going to be in short supply in this primary.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think she's probably one of the stronger candidates, but she's sort of like Kamala Harris, but a little bit more soft-spoken is the wrong word, but she comes across as a little more moderate, which might be a good thing if, the party is not trying to nominate someone super far to the left. But I think it probably will depend on what the base is looking for. I could see her being in the top, shaking out in the top 5 or so.
Surprised Gillibrand doesn't get more grief for basically drumming Al Franken out of the Democratic caucus. She basically led the effort to get him to resign because she thought it would be a good tool to get rid of Roy Moore if he won the Alabama special. And then Roy Moore didn't win the Alabama special, and Al Franken still had to go, which I think was not the original plan, but that's how it worked out. And she was kind of the ringleader of that.
She absolutely was. But again, hypocrisy. Every time she was asked about it, she said, well, this is really a question for my colleague, Senator Franken, and what he thinks is right. And then suddenly when the momentum kind of built to a critical mass on the left, she decided to hop in and be the ringleader of getting him to resign because she's such a principled Me Too leader. But it's really all just a game to her.
Alexandra, I hate to send you off on such a cynical note into the weekend, but that's where we are right now, no doubt about it. Thanks so much for filling in the last couple of days, and have a great weekend.
Absolutely. You too.
Alexandra DeSanctis of National Review, and for Jim Garrity today, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Jim will be back on Tuesday, but still tune in on Monday for the very next 3 Martini Lunch.